U.S. President Donald Trump, who delivered a record-breaking address to Congress this morning. In fact, his first since returning to the White House. It's morning for us viewers, but late night, of course, in the U.S. Trump's remarks followed a series of sweeping policy moves that were on tariffs, on immigration, on Ukraine, and you name it, as well as on the federal workforce reductions. He began his address by stating that his government has accomplished more in 43 days than what administrations managed to achieve in 4 years or even 8. Trump said that he has brought back free speech to the U.S., cited several of the executive orders. He, in fact, also mentioned the order to ban men from playing in women's sports and to officially recognize that there are only 2 genders as far as American government is concerned. In fact, it was blitzkrieg when it came to Trump's speech. Everything and anything he covered, from domestic politics to international focus of his government. Take a look at this report that does a deep dive into what you need to know about that 2-hour-long speech.
We don't want it. Wokeness is trouble. Wokeness is bad. It's gone. It's gone.
With a hopeful note, but it immediately devolved into chaos.
We have been ripped off for decades by nearly every country on earth. And we have ended weaponized government where, as an example, a sitting president is allowed to viciously prosecute his political opponent, like me. I declared a national emergency on our southern border, and I deployed the U.S. military and Border Patrol to repel the invasion of our country. My administration will reclaim power from this unaccountable bureaucracy.
Unusually, Trump name-checked Joe Biden, calling him the worst president in history.
Joe Biden, the worst president in American history.
But it's crucial to note that while post-pandemic inflation was high worldwide during the previous administration in the U.S., the U.S. had the strongest economic recovery in the world at the end of the Biden administration, with a booming stock market, a decrease in inflation, and strong job creation.
India charges us auto tariffs.
Trump slammed India, among others, for having trade policies that are unfair to Americans.
On average, the European Union, China, Brazil, India, Mexico, and Canada, have you heard of them? And countless other nations charge us tremendously higher tariffs than we charge them. It's very unfair. India charges us auto tariffs higher than 100%. April 2nd, reciprocal tariffs kick in. And whatever they tariff us, other countries, we will tariff them.
He also touted February's stunning drop in border crossings and his immigration crackdown.
Within hours of taking the oath of office, I declared a national emergency on our southern border, and I deployed the U.S. military and Border Patrol to repel the invasion of our country. And what a job they've done. As a result, illegal border crossings last month were by far the lowest ever recorded, ever.
However, in the U.S., public monthly data only goes back to the year 2000, and border crossings have been falling over the past year after rising to record highs in 2023. Meanwhile, several dozen House Democrats were holding up small circular signs during this joint address in protest, reading Musk's deals, save Medicaid, and protect veterans. As Donald Trump claims to have reignited America's momentum and pride, his bold actions continue to shake Washington and the world. With a wrecking ball approach that dismantles long-standing policies and pacts, the question remains, is this the revolution America needs or the chaos it fears? Only time will tell. Parmeshwar Bava for NDTV.
All right, Chris joins me from, he's from Voice of America, joins me live to talk about, well, first and foremost, Chris, it was a 2-hour-long speech, the longest by a president. Let me start by asking you, what do you think this means in terms of laying the roadmap for his future policies? After all, it's been less than 2 months in his presidency so far.
Well, it's sending a message to his critics and his supporters that Trump is going to do things his way, and he's not going to care who stands in his way, whether it's his opponents, the court, or members of Congress, the Democratic Congress, which is not in power right now. Trump's GOP controls both houses of Congress. Now, the president spoke for nearly 2 hours, exactly 1 hour and 39 minutes, which was the longest speech from a president to a joint session of Congress. And again, he said his administration has accomplished more in 43 days than most administrations have accomplished in 4 years or 8 years.
Yes.
To date, Trump has signed 80 executive orders, several of which are being challenged in court. And immigration was a big theme in this speech. He touted his declaration of a national emergency at the US-Mexico border.
Yes.
And he said his administration has launched the most sweeping border and immigration crackdown in American history. He also defended Elon Musk's efforts in the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, which has been behind tens of thousands of layoffs of government workers and other
Yes.
deep cuts throughout the federal government.
Indeed. And as far as the protest that came in from the Democratic quarters on the floor of the House, it was quite significant, whether from wearing pink jackets to Al Green being thrown out. It was quite a show, wasn't it? It also reflects the kind of divide that is there in terms of the political opinion in America.
Right. And, it was on display for the whole world to see that this speech was really being given to two different audiences, and that's reflective of the polarization here in the U.S. Just a few minutes into his address, Trump was interrupted by jeering from the House floor, which prompted House Speaker Mike Johnson to direct the Sergeant-at-Arms to throw out Democratic Representative Al Green of Texas, who was shouting, "You have no mandate," when he was escorted out of the chambers. Trump continued his address after Green was removed from the chambers. And some Democratic lawmakers actually followed
Yes.
suit and walked out in the middle of Trump's address. And some others skipped the speech entirely. Now,
Yes.
Democratic Senator Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan, who's a first-term senator from that state, she called for voters to get more involved in politics in her 10-minute rebuttal
Absolutely.
speech, a much shorter speech. And she went on to say, "It's easy to be exhausted, but America needs you now more than ever. If
Yes.
previous generations had not fought for this democracy, where would we be today?" But, political rhetoric is going to meet head-on with political reality as a March 14th deadline looms for
Yes.
Congress to pass legislation to keep the government running and avoid a shutdown. Democrats have vowed to fight the deep cuts that are proposed in this budget by Republicans.
Absolutely. 14th of
Medicare.
March is going to be that showdown. I'm afraid I have to interrupt you there, Chris, but we're going to keep continuing this conversation maybe more on the 14th of March. But, let me just now focus on where Donald Trump named India. In fact, he said that in so many words when he talked about tariffs. And that's the big focus, and that's the big question we are having today on India Global. On your screens right now, can India still avert the reciprocal tariffs that he spoke about? He said 2nd of April because he didn't want anybody to think that he was actually talking about an April Fool's joke. He also went on to say that the second question is that does it also mean, and it highlights the kind of divide that exists in American politics when it comes to tariffs. And the third important part, as far as why we need to discuss in greater detail, is that are they now something that may or may not have the complete backing of the Republicans? Lastly, the drill baby drill campaign of Donald Trump, is it really going to bring down inflation? That's something that's core for his voters. And let's put that out to the panelists joining me today. We have Mr. David K. Johnston, Mr. Vivek Mishra, thank you so much, both of you. Let me start by asking you, Mr. Mishra, who's Deputy Director at the ORF. Vivek, your first thoughts on the fact that President Trump didn't mince his words. He very categorically talked about the auto tariffs, said it's 100% plus. The reciprocal tariffs, he said it's going to kick in less than 4 weeks. How do you see that, and what do you think could be India's response to something like that?
Clearly, it's going to be an arduous path for any country dealing with the United States, which has a surplus of the kind that India has. And I think the path forward is going to be one of negotiation. But the good thing is that if you look at the joint statement of India and the US, there is a willingness and a political intent on both sides to carve out a framework through which both sides can work, and by the fall of this year, come up with a BTA, which is a bilateral trade agreement. Now, the important thing to my mind is that Trump agreeing to a bilateral framework is a big deal, especially with countries that he thinks is taking advantage of. I think he's increasingly carving India in that light, because and that hints to me that the negotiations are going to be tough. But I think from India's perspective, it is going to be a mix of conciliation and red lines. There are certain sectors like agriculture where India will draw clear red lines and say to the United States where we can conciliate, where we cannot. So I think it's going to be a mixed approach going forward, but it's going to be days of hard negotiation, certainly.
It really will be days of hard negotiations. Harley-Davidson, an issue that has been brought about several times from the American side, is likely to feature in those talks. David, let me ask you this, in terms of the tariff rhetoric, we've been talking about it several times. The world is talking about it several times now. There's also a trade war that started with China and Canada. Where do you think the India-America negotiations may go? Because it's unlikely they may go down the path of Canada or China, but where do you think those negotiations will end up being? Because Donald Trump mentioned that from the floor of the House. So he is, of course, going to now follow through with what he just said.
Well, Donald started off by claiming India has 100% tariff on American cars. That's not true. The tariff on luxury cars was 125%, and India recently reduced it to 70%. And the tariff on Harley-Davidson motorcycles made in the U.S. was also cut, I believe, to 40%. Donald is very focused on his belief, his utterly mistaken belief, that tariffs are paid by the country on who they're imposed. They're actually paid by consumers in the country where items are bought. But clearly, he's going to try and get Harley-Davidson in particular an even lower tariff on its motorcycles. Very much Donald's beliefs about economics, and he was given a degree in economics at the college he went to. I don't think he earned it, but he was given one. Is a 17th century view of economics, mercantilism, which was the belief of the British when they put India under their boot.
Okay, this is not about Donald Trump's degree, neither is it about Donald Trump's view. It is about where will those trade negotiations really end up being in terms of give and take. And that's what trade negotiations really are, Vivek, aren't they? It's about a mix of give and take. It's about being able to thrash out differences to identify some sort of a common minimum program in terms of trade. And where do you see that happening? And the reason why I'm asking you this is because, he's unleashed a war. He started a war with two of his biggest trade partners. Surely he can't carry the same view when it comes to negotiations with India.
Clearly, let me take off from where David left. I think, clearly some of the numbers that Trump cites are way off. I think it's more bluster in terms of what he wants to. I mean, it's also a political signaling and a cornering approach to countries that his team will talk to. So I think when the two sides will sit on the table, things will be a little different than it seems it is. That's one. The second is, both the political intent from the Indian side has been pretty clear, as opposed to the first term when we went for retaliatory tariffs. And, we could go for retaliatory tariffs even this time. But I think what we did in our budget signaled that we are ready to
Indeed.
cut our prices in sectors like EV, etc., is a good sort of pathway forward.
In fact, we were very proactive in terms of trying to address some of those concerns that the Trump administration has. Let me now move from the tariff part to the other part, which is the energy piece, to what is very central to the Trump administration's idea of economic policy. And David, the question then is that, he's been talking about drill, baby, drill on several occasions. He has a completely different view in terms of how he wants to take his energy policies going forward. How do you see that impacting the India-US relationship?
Well, the United States right now is the world's largest oil producer. For every 5 barrels the Saudis produce, America produces 7. And so the The big concern I think Donald will have relative to India is his opposition to electric vehicles and his desire to get more exports of American vehicles. And that's the key thing they're going to negotiate. It's important to understand that the US, from India's perspective, is its largest trading partner, or second largest. But for the US, it's only about its seventh and about 2.5% of US trade. So the interests here are quite different between the two countries. India's efforts to build up muscle and capital for its own energy industries and expand its refining, if it wants to do that, will be one of the things that Trump will, in a counterintuitive way, probably have problems with, because he wants more oil exports from the United States.
Okay, a quick closing comments, Vivek, quickly on the energy mix.
I think energy is going to be very crucial. If you look at the joint statement which was recently released, it clearly states that the United States intends to be the largest supplier of energy to India. How that happens remains a wild card. There is definitely a pumping up of energy on the US side, but the supply chains remains an issue. And if it crosses Middle East, there's a lot of fragility that it rides upon.
All right, we leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you so much for taking out the time speaking to me on India Global on an issue I'm afraid we're going to keep revisiting. The bottom line, viewers, as far as Trump's address is concerned, in his maiden second-term address to Congress, Donald Trump has touted the unprecedented progress of his administration, claiming he has achieved more in 43 days than most presidents managed in 8 years. From reasserting free speech to promising a war on high egg prices, Donald Trump's rhetoric was as bold as it was brash. He was declared a comeback like no other, vowing to put America back on top with tariffs, border control, and a sharp attack on Biden's leadership. But beneath the surface of this fiery speech seems to be some sort of a game of blame shifting and possibly polarizing rhetoric. He portrayed his policies as a swift return to common sense. Yet, the cost of this vision, a society cleaved by culture wars, where competence is measured by politics, not skill. As Trump continues to fan the flames, it remains to be seen what common sense American policymakers will apply when Trump once again mentions about taking over Greenland and Canada. In fact, when US President Donald Trump spoke about the need to build America's Golden Dome to protect against incoming threats, he was referring to a ballistic missile defense shield among the most sophisticated and the most complicated to design, develop, and in fact even operationalize. Israel has one which it used to ward off Iranian ballistic missiles. So does America, but Trump wants it to be bigger and better. What really is this all about? Vishnu Som gets that detailed report for you.
When the US President Donald Trump spoke about the need to build America's Golden Dome to protect against incoming threats, he was referring to a ballistic missile defense shield. Surface-to-air missiles like this actually intercept incoming ballistic missiles before they hit their target. Now, America has a missile defense shield among the most sophisticated in the world, but what Trump wants to do is large size it. Now, that's not going to be easy to do given the size of the United States. It has to be designed, developed, and operationalized in parts. Some of it is already in operation. Israel has a similar system, which it used recently, ward off Iranian ballistic missiles. So does America, but have an option that is really viable? Let me bring you a few details. Now, America's ballistic missile defense shield, which Trump calls the Golden Dome, has several key systems designed to detect, track, and intercept incoming ballistic missiles at various stages of flight: boost, mid-course, and terminal phases. There are many systems at play. The basic goal is to shoot down a missile before it hits its target. It relies on this, the ground-based mid-course defense system, or GMD. That system is the backbone of US homeland defenses against intercontinental ballistic missiles, which China and North Korea have. It uses ground-based interceptors like what you see over there, deployed at Fort Greely, Alaska, and at the Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. There's also the Aegis ballistic missile defense. That's a sea and land-based system. Aegis employs Navy destroyers and cruisers to engage short to intermediate range ballistic missiles. Then there is the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, or THAAD. That's a mobile land-based system that intercepts short and medium and also intermediate range ballistic missiles during their terminal phase or the last phase of their flight using hit-to-kill technology. It hits an incoming missile to ensure that it is destroyed. There's also the Patriot Advanced Capability 3 system, PAC-3. It's used, in fact, by several armies and air forces around the world. This system focuses on shorter range ballistic missiles and air threats in the terminal phase. It's used in Ukraine as well. Now, all of this is brought together by a space-based infrared system called SBIRS and radars. Detection relies on the space-based system of satellites for early warning of missile launches, paired with a host of ground-based radars. Remember, if you don't have the sensors, you can't have the shooters. Without these sensors, detecting the launch of an incoming ballistic missile system becomes difficult, if not impossible.